Imagine catching your spouse in a lie so big it destroys everything you've built together for over a decade. One moment in a crowded restaurant, and my world shattered. You won't believe how this story ends. A few days ago, I had a serious talk with my wife of over a decade, Melissa. Unfortunately, it ended with her in tears, reminding me of another tough moment about 3 years ago when my job was on the line. At that time, Melissa, who also goes by Missy, was upset because I was about to miss our anniversary. She was adamant I make it home. Fast forward to today, and now it's her who won't be around for our anniversary. I didn't try to change her mind, but despite it all, these last 12 years have been the best of my life. When I first crossed paths with Melissa, she was 25, just getting her footing in the marketing world. She had come to our construction firm to pitch placing ads in luxury magazines, something we couldn't afford at the time. Even in the crowded room, I was drawn to this striking woman with shoulder-length blonde hair and a confident smile. After running the idea by my colleague, he nudged me to talk to her long enough to ask her out. After our first date, she admitted she knew we couldn't afford her services, yet I still found myself head over heels. Within 6 months, our relationship took off. Eventually, she moved in with me, and half a year later, she settled into a more stable office job. For months after that, we were standing at the altar in Seattle, and I still feel incredibly lucky that she said yes. That same sense of urgency hit me today as I called my boss. I've been with this company since its early days when Richard, my boss, first got it up and running. Our small group of architects, just 4 of us back then, accomplished a lot by streamlining our processes. "Richard, please pick up," I pleaded into the phone. After a few rings, I finally heard his voice. "Mark, what's going on?" "I'm slammed over here," he said, clearly in a rush. Trying to keep it short, I replied, "Look, I'm heading out now, and I won't be back until Monday." "Where are you off to?" he asked. "I'm going to celebrate my anniversary with Melissa," I said. "I'll see you Monday." "Enjoy the trip, and don't forget to check in when you get back," he said with a chuckle. I laughed and responded, "You always know how to lighten the mood." "Yeah, I get that a lot," Richard quipped. Not wanting to leave on a sour note, I added, "I'm sorry things have been tense lately, ever since they brought in that new guy to manage Melissa's department. Maybe this weekend away will help." "Well, it certainly can't hurt. Just remember to enjoy yourself and take it easy," he said. "Deal," I promised before hanging up. But I didn't leave it at that. I called Richard's assistant, Julia, asking her to book me a flight. Julia's always been a miracle worker when it comes to last-minute arrangements. While I was packing my bag, the phone rang again. "You've got 45 minutes to make it through security. The ticket's waiting at the counter in your name," Julia informed me. She managed to secure a return flight for Sunday afternoon at 1:30 p.m., but there was a small hitch. Melissa's hotel, the Windsor Grand, was fully booked, so she arranged for me to stay at a place just a couple of blocks away, the Lakeside Inn. "Safe travels, see you Monday," she added before hanging up. I hurriedly grabbed my toiletries, packed up, and gave the place a quick once-over, even turning off the coffee maker, a rare move for me. I sped to the airport, using shortcuts I had discovered over the years. Despite my rush, I made it to my gate with time to spare. After check-in and security, I boarded the flight and settled into my seat. Once we were airborne, I put on my headphones and played some music to calm my nerves. I'm not the best flyer, to say the least. 3 hours into the flight, I was jolted awake by a tap on my shoulder. I had dozed off, unsurprising given the lack of sleep lately. Work stress and the strain in my relationship with Melissa had been keeping me up at night. She had been distant for a couple of months now, ever since a new manager, David Reed, took over her department. At first, she was furious, determined to prove they had made the wrong choice. She worked tirelessly to outperform him, but soon enough, her frustration shifted. She started talking about how they'd been working together on a major client. It was impossible not to wonder if there was something more going on. Every time that fear surfaced, though, Melissa would reassure me. As I grabbed my bag from the overhead bin, I was already thinking about how to surprise her with a dinner invitation. When I finally touched down and took a cab to my hotel, the driver mentioned a cozy, intimate restaurant just down the street from her hotel called La Terraza. It sounded perfect, so I made a mental note. After checking into my room at the Lakeside Inn, I quickly freshened up and headed out. I glanced at the clock, it was already 5:30. I wanted to catch Melissa before she left for dinner, so I took my time strolling through the bustling streets, following the driver's directions to the restaurant. By 5:50, I walked into her hotel's lobby and got in line at the front desk. As I waited, I exchanged a friendly smile with the receptionist, who waved me forward. "Hi, my name is Mark Rivers. I was wondering if my wife, Melissa Rivers, is in her room at the moment. I'd really appreciate the chance to talk to her." "Melissa Rivers, you said," she asked as she double-checked the records. After a moment, she nodded. "Yes, she's a guest here. Give me a moment to check if she's in her room." She dialed the room number, waited a bit, and then turned back to me with an apologetic look. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's no answer." "Would you like to leave a message?" she asked. "Not right now," I replied, the disappointment clear in my voice. I was hoping to surprise her. "It's our anniversary tomorrow," I smiled slightly. "I'd appreciate it if you didn't mention this conversation to her." "Of course, sir, don't worry," she assured me, smiling politely. "Have a wonderful day tomorrow." "Thanks. I'm thinking of heading to a restaurant nearby, maybe I'll get lucky and bump into her," I said with a hopeful tone. "Good luck, sir." "Have a great evening," she replied as I turned to leave. I headed toward the back of the lobby, where the noise grew louder. It was packed with people working, chatting, and dining. The chances of finding her in such a large crowd seemed pretty low. Still, I scanned the room thoroughly, even spotting a restroom in the far corner. After taking a quick look around, I decided to move on, feeling a bit frustrated. Just as I was about to give up, I heard a familiar laugh. It was faint, but it instantly grabbed my attention. I followed the sound, my eyes searching for her, but the tall booths blocked most of my view. Slowly, I walked along the wall, moving closer to where the laughter had come from, trying to catch a glimpse of her. Then I saw her. Melissa was sitting at a table, deep in conversation with a man I didn't recognize. She looked stunning, wearing the same red dress she always wore on special nights out. The two of them seemed relaxed and comfortable, more so than I would have expected from just a casual dinner with a colleague. My heart raced as I watched him lean toward her, and before I knew it, they kissed, soft and unhurried. I grabbed the door frame, my legs feeling weak as I processed what I had just witnessed. She had leaned in too, like it was the most natural thing in the world for them. I backed away from the doorway, moving toward the center of the room. I sank into one of the padded chairs, my mind spinning as I kept my eyes glued to their table. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as I sat there, stunned and motionless. Then I heard her laugh again. I turned my head just in time to see them walking out of the hotel, hand in hand. Melissa held his arm, leaning against him as they passed within a few feet of me. They spoke quietly, but I couldn't make out the words. What struck me most was the look on her face, pure affection, something I hadn't seen in a long time. I watched them head down the street, rounding a corner toward La Terraza, the same restaurant I had noticed earlier. Slowly, I got up and followed them, keeping my distance. My emotions were a tangled mess, but I knew I had to see more, understand more. By the time I reached the restaurant, they had already gone inside. I paused outside, taking a deep breath to calm myself. I needed to think, rushing in wouldn't help. After a few moments, I cautiously stepped inside, sticking close to the wall. The place was dimly lit, and my eyes adjusted as I scanned the room. There they were, sitting at a small table meant for two, tucked away in the back. I found an empty table nearby and sat down. A waitress approached almost immediately. "What can I get for you?" she asked kindly. "Double scotch on the rocks," I replied, not even looking up from the table. As I waited, I strained to hear their conversation. The man was speaking softly. "Our meeting tomorrow isn't until 10, so we can stay out late tonight," he said to Melissa. She smiled and responded, "I'm glad you didn't let him talk you into going home. We couldn't miss our 2-month anniversary." "2 months already," he replied, his tone playful. "It could have been longer if you had taken me up on my offer during that first week." She laughed. "I had to play it cool, you know. I'm still technically married," she said with a wry smile. My stomach dropped. I sat there frozen as they continued talking. He mentioned they should do something special for her since she played a big role in bringing them together, Melissa suggested, just as the waitress arrived to serve their drinks before swiftly walking away. Raising their glasses, they toasted to the incredible 2 months they had shared and to many more ahead. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said as their glasses clinked. "There will be many more," Melissa replied cheerfully, smiling brightly. As the waitress placed my drink in front of me, she asked, "Here you go, dear. Is that all for now?" I handed her a $10 bill. "Thank you," I said, before turning my attention back to Melissa and her companion at the next table. They glanced up at me briefly, but as strangers, my presence didn't seem to matter to them. Melissa noticed his gaze shift toward me and looked over herself. "You know," I said, trying to keep my tone light but with a bitter edge, "a guy should always have a camera ready for moments like this." Her expression was telling, limitless in emotion, like something straight out of a picture-perfect postcard. "Wow, 2 months, huh? That's a special milestone," I continued, barely masking the pain beneath the surface. "I still remember my anniversaries, but after 12 years, it starts to lose a bit of its shine." Watching them both, I couldn't stop myself from adding, "Let's celebrate 2 months, a symbol of passion and success, right? A couple like you definitely deserves a gift." I reached into my pocket and tossed the ring in Melissa's direction, the symbol of a life we once had. "Here's a surprise," I said, before either of them could react. Paul, the man with her, stood up suddenly, his temper flaring. Melissa quickly tried to calm him down, but I cut her off, turning directly to her. "Why don't you tell him how lucky he is that he wasn't at my house?" I suggested, with a calm voice that felt like it was teetering on the edge. "Let me know where you'd like to receive your things," I said quietly. "If you're smart, you'll avoid coming by the house." I gave Paul one last look. "Maybe some ice will help with that temper if you ever get too close," I added before turning away, leaving the restaurant without looking back. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the heat of the moment burning my skin. I walked briskly back to my hotel, my mind racing as I tried to create distance, both physically and mentally. There was no way Melissa knew my current address, and after what I had just said to her new friend, it seemed unlikely she would chase me down. As soon as I stepped into the lobby, I hurried up to the front desk. "Excuse me," I said to the receptionist, "do you have the contact numbers for any airlines? I need to book a flight as soon as possible." "Certainly, sir," she replied. "May I ask what airline you prefer and when you'd like to depart?" I gave her all the necessary details, and she assured me she would have the flight information sent to my room. I headed back upstairs, pacing back and forth once inside, my thoughts in turmoil. How could everything have gone so wrong so quickly? Then it hit me, maybe Melissa had missed her true calling in life. After all, she had been performing pretty convincingly for months now. My frustration boiled over, and I couldn't stand being in the room any longer. Grabbing my bag hastily, I hurried down the stairs and back to the lobby. The receptionist, just finishing a phone call, signaled me over. "Sir, if you leave now, you might just make the last flight tonight. Check-in closes in 30 minutes. If you miss it, the next one isn't for another 3 hours," she informed me. "Thank you," I said, hoping I could count on the taxi drivers to be quick. I signed the cash receipt the woman handed me, gave her a polite smile, and apologized for cutting my stay short. "Please stay with us again next time," she said warmly as I headed for the door. As I stepped outside, a wave of memories washed over me, our life together, the good times, all suddenly tainted. I flagged down a taxi from the lot nearby and got in quickly. "I bet you $50 you can get me to the airport in under 30 minutes, I said as I slid into the back seat. "You got it, boss," the driver replied with a grin, snapping me back to the moment. He turned out to be good at his job and got me to the airport in just 20 minutes. I paid the fare, threw in a $150 tip, and rushed to the terminal. Once inside, I realized there was no reason to panic. I had a few minutes to spare before boarding. Unlike my last flight, where I needed music to calm my nerves, this time I had plenty of distractions swirling in my head. A random thought crossed my mind, and I nearly laughed out loud. Melissa's mother never liked me. Helen always had Greg under her thumb and treated him like he didn't matter. She had even accused me of being unfaithful to Melissa, saying she caught me glancing at other women when we were together. As the plane took off, doubt gnawed at me. I pulled out a photo of Melissa and me that I always carried. Looking at it now, the person standing next to her seemed unfamiliar. I glanced around to make sure no one noticed before returning my gaze to the picture. What caught my eye was the way she looked at me back then. Now, it was like she reserved that gaze for someone else. I shook my head. Melissa often tested my memory, asking if I remembered this or that. I prided myself on remembering the details, but now it seemed all I could remember were the cracks in the foundation of our marriage. I remembered everything, every conversation, every plan, and all the little secrets we had whispered to each other in the dark. Sitting there now, I couldn't help but wonder how I had missed all of this for the past 2 months. If I hadn't noticed what had been happening between Melissa and this man, what else had slipped by unnoticed? She had mentioned his interest from the first week they met but claimed she turned him down to maintain appearances because of our marriage. The thought of them being together gnawed at me, and I knew I needed a plan. I decided I'd go home, pack all her belongings, and take them to her mother's house. Of course, Helen would find some way to blame me, but the truth was right in front of me. I couldn't ignore what I had seen. When I finally arrived at the airport, our family life felt like it was unraveling right before my eyes. I headed straight to my car, joined the line at the exit, and began the drive home. The whole journey felt like a blur, and I honestly couldn't remember much of it. But none of that mattered. Stepping into the house, now dim and quiet, I was overwhelmed by a sense of unfamiliarity. It dawned on me that I'd have to get used to this emptiness, as it was likely my new reality. After dropping my bag, I walked into the kitchen and almost instinctively turned on the answering machine. Melissa's voice, shaky and pleading, came through the speaker. "Mark, please don't do anything drastic. I'm coming home to talk. Just wait until I get there," she begged, her voice filled with emotion. I knew she didn't deserve sympathy after everything, but hearing her like that hit me harder than I expected. Still, I couldn't let it sway me. Angry and needing to focus, I slammed my fist down on the counter. I knew my actions might seem rash, but I had to protect myself from making any foolish decisions. Sleep wasn't going to come easily that night, so I went to the garage and gathered up the suitcases Melissa had collected over the years. I picked out a large black suitcase for her clothes and set it aside. Grabbing a few more bags, I headed upstairs. Once in the bedroom, I methodically went through her closet, pulling out items and stuffing them into the suitcase. I repeated the process several times, moving from her closet to the dresser. It had been a while since I'd noticed any of her personal things here. For a brief moment, the thought of grabbing some food crossed my mind, but I quickly dismissed it. I was supposed to drop everything off at her mother's house, but I wasn't ready to face her parents. Instead, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Rather than wait around for Melissa, I drove to a hardware store and bought new locks for the house. Once I got back, I realized I couldn't leave the pile of her things sitting in the front room. Following through with my plan, I loaded all of her belongings into the car and drove to her mom's place. I was careful on the drive, not in any rush, but still wanting to get it over with. Once there, I unloaded everything near the garage, not wanting to make Greg, her father, deal with any of this, especially since his wife and daughter likely wouldn't lift a finger to help him. As I set the third box down, Helen appeared. "Mark, what's all this? What's going on?" she asked, her face pale with confusion. "Well," I started, "when Melissa gets here, she might need her clothes. I thought she'd come by herself to get them, but I didn't want to wait any longer. They were taking up space at the house." Helen looked at me, still bewildered. "What do you mean, when she gets here? I thought she was out of town. Why would her things be here?" "Helen, I'm not sure what her plans are, but I assume she might stay with you for a while, or maybe she's thinking about moving in with the person she's been spending time with. I don't know for sure, which is why I brought her stuff." Her face went even paler as I spoke. "What are you implying? Are you accusing my daughter of something?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and rising anger. "She had to stay for work. Melissa would never cheat on you." I shook my head slowly. "I saw them together, Helen. They looked happy. They were celebrating their 2-month anniversary at a restaurant near the hotel. I had asked her repeatedly to come home for our anniversary, and she always said she couldn't. I finally decided to fly out there to surprise her." I paused, feeling a lump in my throat as I recalled what I had witnessed. When I arrived, they were having an intimate dinner. The atmosphere was romantic. I didn't want to make a scene, so I stayed back, but I saw them kiss across the table. I needed time to gather my thoughts. Helen stared at me in shock as I continued. When they passed me in the hotel lobby later, I thought about confronting them, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. She was looking at him the way she used to look at me. I took a breath. They left the hotel together, heading for the restaurant. I followed them, sat at a table nearby, and overheard their conversation. She didn't want to leave him on their 2-month anniversary, and then he corrected her, saying it was their 3rd. Helen shook her head, her voice faint. "That can't be true. Melissa would never." "I don't want to believe it either," I interrupted, but I saw it with my own eyes. The weight of everything pressed down on me as I finished unloading the last of Melissa's things. I got back in my car, preparing to leave. On the drive home, I kept replaying the events in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. Back at the house, I sat down, waiting for Melissa to return and for the inevitable confrontation. I thought about everything, our marriage, the good and the bad, and how it had led to this. I had been sober for 10 years, ever since Melissa told me she was worried my drinking would ruin us. To show her my commitment, I had even given her my wedding ring, a gesture meant to symbolize my dedication. Now, though, it felt like everything I had done was meaningless. She had traded it all for someone else, and as I waited, I couldn't help but wonder how this confrontation would play out. I was certain she'd come back to me, probably hoping to seek shelter at my doorstep for a while. I had said what I did just to shock her. "You're lying," Helen had snapped, her voice rising. "How can you say such things about your wife? The woman you've been with for over 12 years. She's told me everything, and she's deeply troubled by it." "I'll never call her my wife again," I said firmly. "You might feel like you have to support her because she's your daughter, but I have no such obligation. I saw everything firsthand. And for the past 2 months, I've been living alone while she's been with him, ever since he joined the company. It's shocking, really, to see how much she's changed, given the way you raised her." Helen had looked me dead in the eye, her face pale as I continued. "For 3 months, she lied to me every day without an ounce of remorse. If you think I'm going to let her back into my home, you're even more foolish than she is. But it's your choice what you want to believe, that's your problem now. Personally, I've decided to cut my losses. It's clear she has real feelings for this guy, and he's welcome to her. She won't need to hide their relationship anymore. I could see the disbelief washing over Helen as I spoke. When she's done playing her little games, I'll point her straight back here. You'll see for yourself who's telling the truth. I had finished handing her the last of Melissa's things. If she calls, make sure you tell her everything exactly how you want. Include the fact that I'm very curious to see how she handles all this. With that, I had turned and gotten into the car, driving away with a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Restless, I wandered around the house for hours, aimlessly trying to clear my mind. Eventually, I found a quiet corner in the garage and set up a makeshift workspace, just trying to keep myself busy. Suddenly, the sound of the doorbell broke through the silence. Curiosity got the better of me, and I went to answer it. I opened the door cautiously, without saying a word. Instinctively, I took a step back as Melissa walked into the room. I immediately realized I was still in the garage. "You must have been in the garage," she remarked, closing the door behind her. I knocked, but you didn't hear me. "I was just tidying up," I replied, glancing around the room to avoid her gaze. Melissa sighed. "Well, Mom already called me. It seems like you've already made up your mind about what to do with me." I looked at her, her face a mix of sadness and disappointment. "What did you expect?" I asked. "Did you think I'd be okay with you having an affair?" She paused, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I guess I wasn't thinking clearly. At least, not rationally," she admitted, her voice tinged with regret. I shook my head. "That's the difference between us, Melissa. All I did was think. I had no choice but to. There was no one around to distract me. I missed having someone to go to dinner with, to visit a club with, to share whispered conversations in the dark. But instead, I was left with a woman who could look me in the eye, share my house, my life, and still be close to someone else." I paused, letting the bitterness creep into my words. "Not a pleasant thought, is it? Are you really ready to throw away 12 years of our life together?" she asked, her voice soft. "Did it ever cross your mind to ask me how I felt? Did it ever cross your mind to think how I'd feel about you having a real relationship with someone else, instead of just playing games?" I replied, frustration boiling over. "But I guess that doesn't matter anymore, does it? Now you and, well, whatever his name is, you can both move on without caring about me. No more arguments over who gets to spend the anniversary with you." Melissa looked down, guilt and shame washing over her. "I think I understand your point of view now," she said softly. "Do you really, Melissa?" I asked, my voice rising. "Because I don't think you do. For you, this was just an act of infidelity, something you probably managed to justify to yourself. Maybe you even tried to shift the blame onto me. Is that it? Did my actions push you into someone else's arms?" She shook her head, eyes downcast. "No, I don't blame you for this. It just happened." "Just happened?" I scoffed. "Having an affair for 2 months isn't something that just happens, Melissa. It takes effort, and a lot of secrecy. Keeping it going, well, that takes even more. I've got to hand it to you, though, you played the role well." I sighed, feeling the weight of everything crashing down on me. "I loved you completely, unconditionally. It's hard to believe you two managed to find the time to laugh about cheating on me, and that phone call last night, that tearful plea, that was a real performance. Maybe you should consider acting, you'd put the last 3 Oscar winners to shame." I let out a bitter laugh, unable to hold it back. It was a sudden, uncontrollable outburst, and I stopped myself almost immediately. I stared at her, and the reality of the situation settled in. "It's obvious you don't love me. If you did, you wouldn't treat me this way." Melissa's face hardened, her voice indignant. How can you say that I don't love you after 12 years, she demanded. I looked her in the eyes, my voice steady but cold. Listen, Melissa, since you like asking questions, here's one for you. Think about how you usually react to different situations. Now imagine you found out I had been involved with someone else, not a long-term affair, just a one-time thing. How do you think you'd react? She leaned forward, her voice barely a whisper. Honestly? I think I would have asked you to leave our house and file for divorce. I thanked her for her honesty and admitted I expected that kind of reaction, maybe even imagined she'd throw something at me. I paused for a moment, thinking aloud. But who knows, I said. Melissa responded with a faint smile, perhaps. Now, imagine that for nearly 3 months, every single day we spent together meant nothing to me. It was all just a front, a lie to make you believe our relationship was fine, when in reality I was going through the motions while my heart belonged to someone else. I spent my days with another woman and then came home to you. I looked at her seriously. Could you really believe that I love you after nearly 13 years? She stared at me silently. I continued, show some confidence, Melissa. It's like you're implying this whole thing doesn't even matter to you. She shook her head. Of course it matters. The time we spent together was real. It wasn't just casual. I genuinely enjoyed being with you. Do you? I asked, incredulous. Do you remember the last time we were close, Melissa? When was the last time you initiated one of those affectionate moments between us? One of our little kisses. When did you last act like my wife? I paused, shaking my head. After what I've witnessed, after hearing what I've heard, it's hard to believe you're standing here telling me you love me. I'm not naive. I overheard you talking with Jenna about him, gossiping from the moment he showed up at the office. And then, as if that wasn't enough, you two even came up with the brilliant idea of giving Jenna a gift for bringing you together. It's like you've already found your next bridesmaid. Now all you need is his best man, and the wedding banquet will be ready. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of it all settling in. So, turns out you're just like me after all. Should I expect a process server to show up at my door, Melissa? She frowned. What are you getting at? She asked, clearly confused. First and foremost, I need to know where you're going to live, I said coldly. Don't worry about a server showing up, I'll be the one to hand you the divorce papers myself. I sighed. That's it. The case is closed. Move on from me, Melissa, and don't bother me if you see me with someone else. Just don't. Melissa stared at me, frustration creeping into her voice. What are you trying to prove with all this? I'm not trying to prove anything to you, I said flatly. What I did for me, not for you. I fought to preserve something that was important to me, our marriage. Why would I fight for someone like you, someone who clearly disrespected me enough to believe I'd tolerate your betrayal? When I gave you the ring, it was a clear sign that you were done, in my eyes. She didn't speak, so I continued. I'm not wasting energy on something that doesn't matter to either of us anymore. I can't forget or forgive, and it's obvious now that I'm not a priority in your life. So it's time for me to let go of you, Melissa, and move on. You've ruined everything, and now you can stay at his place. Her eyes widened. You're kicking me out and keeping everything? That doesn't seem fair after 12 years, she replied bitterly. I shook my head. It always comes down to a deal, doesn't it? Well, if you want a house, you'll have to pay for it. As for me, I'm keeping this one. I've grown to love it. With the extra space, I can finally make it into what I really want. I assumed you and your friend had already found a place by now, I added. His name is Paul, she corrected sharply. I couldn't care less about that, I replied. Does Paul have somewhere to live? Of course he does, she said. Well, then, problem solved, I responded. I was waiting for her answer, and it hit me. Do you think his wife knows about all this? Her expression shifted. Wait, how do you know he's married? She asked, her voice suddenly serious. I laughed, shaking my head. You think I'm naive, don't you? Why else would you be here, Melissa? Does he not want to divorce his wife for you? Melissa fell silent, her eyes dropping to the floor. I hope you didn't seriously think about coming back to me, I continued. I've thought about it for a while, considering how we lasted 12 years. But now, after reflecting, I know we're done. You made that decision, not me. So I hope those 2 months you spent with him were worth it. Maybe you'll have many more together. I paused again, my voice steady as I looked directly at her. When I gave you that ring, it marked the end. Don't try to make excuses about our 12 years together. Those years didn't matter to you then, and they don't matter to me now. So I'll be making up for those lost years with a set of legal documents as soon as they're ready. And the offer still stands. If you want to come back and grab whatever you need, go ahead. Otherwise, move on with your life. Melissa took a deep breath, clearly processing everything. I'll need a few days to find a new place, she said, taking her hand out of her pocket. I'll probably take some of the furniture, too. She held out her hand, showing me the ring. What should I do with this? I looked at it for a moment before replying, do whatever you want with it. A sudden thought crossed my mind, and I let out a small sarcastic laugh. Hey, here's an idea, why not use it as a toe ring? It'd fit perfectly on your big toe, considering how you treated me and him. I might actually find some use for it, Melissa muttered, glancing at the ring. Well, you know what? I could use some extra money. Maybe I'll pawn it, she warned. I shrugged. You won't get much for it. They usually buy by weight, and you'll probably get less than $130. You can't buy a genuine gold ring for that, but hey, it's your ring, do whatever you want with it. I turned toward the door, signaling that the conversation was nearing its end. Did you get all my stuff out of the closet? She asked, still rummaging through her things. Yes, I got everything, I said, trying to sound casual. Though I did get a little annoyed with the furniture while packing. I'll call you in a few days, she added. I have to admit I didn't pack everything perfectly. Hope you still have some clean, unwrinkled clothes for the move. Feel free to check. You know where everything is, I said. She frowned slightly but walked upstairs, going through the bedroom, the closet, and finally the bathroom. After a few minutes, she came back downstairs, packing her cosmetics into a floral zip-up bag. You were pretty thorough, she commented, but you missed a few things. I might need to call you when it's time to move everything. I forced a smile. Of course, I'd be happy to help, as long as it's not too close to me. She smiled back, but I could see the tension behind it. As I got up to open the door for her, she suddenly suggested, want to go for a walk? I paused for a moment, considering the request. Then an idea crossed my mind. Wouldn't it be too much to ask you to run instead? I asked, my tone serious. Kiss me on the spot, she replied without hesitation, a playful challenge in her voice. I gave her a flat look. I wouldn't dare kiss someone when I don't know where she's been. With that, I closed the door behind her, and that was the last time we spoke. 3 months later, my lawyer had filed all the necessary divorce documents, and I was instructed to pick them up on Monday. My plan for the day was simple. First, I'd stop by the lawyer's office, and then head to Melissa's mother's house to get her signature. I wanted everything finalized to make sure she didn't harbor any illusions of reconciliation. Parking outside her house, I took a deep breath and stared at the familiar front door. This was the last step before I could finally move on. I walked up, rang the doorbell, and waited. To my surprise, it was my mother-in-law who answered. Well, Mark, what brings you here? She asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and concern. I thought you had forgotten about us. Not yet, I replied, forcing a smile. Is Melissa home? Yes, she's here. Come on in, she said, stepping aside to let me in. A few moments later, Melissa appeared in the room. I held up the papers. I need you to sign these, I explained. I'll file them tomorrow, and then our divorce will be final. I just want to be done with this. Melissa sighed deeply. I don't think I was ever good enough for you, she murmured. Do you really think I'd just stand by after everything that's happened these past few months? I asked, my voice firm. Without saying anything further, she left the room briefly, returning with a pen in hand. She quickly signed her name on each page, her movements deliberate, and I watched closely. When she finished, she dropped the pen onto the table with a clatter, then gathered everything into a manila envelope, sealing the documents inside. Free now, she said quietly, her voice carrying a strange mix of relief and sadness. Thank you for signing, I replied, my tone distant. Take care of yourself, and I hope you find happiness. Shifting her focus away from me, she called out, Mom, you can come back in now. Congratulations to you too, I said flatly before walking out the door. As I drove away, a wave of emotions hit me, relief, sadness, uncertainty. I knew this was the end, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was about to change in ways I hadn't anticipated. A month later, our divorce was finalized, and I felt like my new life had truly begun. But soon after, I received unexpected news from Melissa's father. He informed me that after our divorce, Melissa had asked Paul to leave his wife and marry her. To her shock, Paul admitted he had no romantic feelings for her and refused to leave his wife. Melissa was devastated. According to her father, she had to face the reality that she'd lost both me and Paul. After our split, she moved back in with her parents and started searching for a new job, having been disgracefully dismissed from her old one, just like Paul, thanks to the fallout from their affair. Her father mentioned that Melissa was now unhappy, trying to find her way. She'd had a few encounters with men, but they were either married and looking for a fling, or had questionable reputations. Her failed relationships and the emotional toll of it all had led Melissa to develop a psychiatric illness, and she was now in therapy, trying to piece her life back together.